In a small, lush village nestled between two great rivers, there was much excitement in the air. The villagers gathered around the home of Chief Daru and his wife, Neka, as they awaited the arrival of the newest members of the village. Neka was in labor, and the midwives whispered among themselves that the birth was going to be special. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the village, the first cry rang out. A healthy, beautiful baby girl was born, and she was named Adana, meaning father's daughter. The villagers cheered, for Adana was a sight to behold. Her skin was as smooth as silk, her eyes sparkled like the stars, and her tiny fingers wrapped around her father's thumb as if to say, "I am here." But the midwives knew that Neka was not yet finished. Another baby was coming, and the air grew tense with anticipation. After what felt like an eternity, the second baby was born. She was different, tall, thin, and fragile-looking. Her limbs were long and slender, and she didn't cry as loudly as her sister. The villagers whispered among themselves, unsure of what to make of the second child. Chief Daru looked at his second daughter with a mix of confusion and concern. He named her Kyra, meaning peace, for he hoped that she would bring harmony to their family. But as he held her, he couldn't shake the feeling that Kyra would face many challenges in the years to come. As the girls grew, it became clear that they were as different as night and day. Adana was the picture of perfection, with her round cheeks, full figure, and infectious laughter. Kyra, on the other hand, was tall, skinny, and quiet. Her limbs seemed too long for her body, and she moved with a grace that was almost ghostly. The villagers often remarked that Adana was the jewel of the village, while Kyra was the shadow. But Neka loved both of her daughters equally. She saw in Kyra a quiet strength, a wisdom beyond her years. She would often say to her husband, "Kyra may not be like the others, but she has a heart as pure as gold." Chief Daru would nod, but deep down, he worried about Kyra's future. He knew that the village valued beauty above all else, and he feared that Kyra would struggle to find her place in the world. As the years passed, the differences between the twins became more pronounced. Adana was adored by all, while Kyra was often ignored or teased for her unusual appearance. The other children would call her the walking stick or the tall tree, and even Adana, who once loved her sister dearly, began to distance herself from Kyra. The bond between the twins began to fray, and Kyra found herself alone more often than not. Despite the teasing and the loneliness, Kyra never let bitterness take root in her heart. She found solace in the beauty of nature, spending her days wandering through the forest, talking to the trees, and watching the birds. She had a special connection with the world around her, one that no one else in the village could understand. The animals would come to her, unafraid, and the wind seemed to whisper secrets only she could hear. Kyra knew she was different, but she also knew that her differences made her unique. She longed for the day when someone would see past her appearance and recognize the beauty within her. Little did she know that her journey was just beginning, and that her strength and kindness would soon be put to the test. As the twins grew older, the differences between them became even more apparent. By the time they were 10 years old, Adana had blossomed into a beautiful young girl, admired by everyone in the village. Her hair was thick and shiny, her eyes sparkled with mischief, and her laughter was like music that filled the air with joy. Wherever Adana went, people would stop to greet her, showering her with compliments and gifts. She was the pride of the village, the jewel in her father's crown. Kyra, on the other hand, grew taller and thinner with each passing year. While Adana's body filled out with the soft curves of childhood, Kyra remained long and lanky. Her limbs seemed too long for her frame, and her skin, though smooth, had a paleness that contrasted sharply with Adana's warm, glowing complexion. The villagers noticed, and the whispers began to spread. "She looks like a scarecrow," one woman would say, shaking her head as Kyra passed by. "It's a shame," another would add. "Such a beautiful mother and sister, but look at her. She'll never find a husband." Kyra heard these whispers, though she pretended not to. She walked through the village with her head held high, refusing to let their words break her spirit. But inside, she felt the sting of their judgment. She wished she could be like Adana, effortlessly loved and admired. She wished the villagers could see that there was more to her than just her appearance. As the years went on, Adana began to enjoy the attention she received. She would often look in the mirror, admiring her own reflection, and she started to believe that her beauty made her better than others, especially her sister. The villagers' constant praise went to her head, and she became proud and vain. One day, as the twins were preparing to go to the river, Adana looked at Kyra and frowned. "Why do you always wear those old, boring clothes, Kyra? Don't you care about how you look? No wonder everyone in the village laughs at you." Kyra looked down at her simple dress, which was clean but plain, and then at her sister's colorful, fashionable attire. Adana's dress was made of fine cloth, with intricate patterns and bright colors that made her stand out. Kyra's dress, on the other hand, was a dull shade of brown, with no decorations or frills. "I like my dress," Kyra said softly. "It's comfortable." Adana rolled her eyes. "Comfortable? Who cares about comfortable? You need to look good, Kyra. Maybe then people will stop calling you names." Kyra felt a lump form in her throat, but she didn't respond. She knew her sister was right about one thing: people did call her names. But she also knew that no matter what she wore, it wouldn't change how people saw her. They would still see her as the tall, skinny girl who didn't fit in. As the twins walked to the river, the village children began to gather around Adana, laughing and chatting with her. They admired her dress and asked her to tell them stories. Adana basked in the attention, forgetting all about her sister, who walked a few steps behind. Kyra watched from a distance as Adana entertained the crowd. She was happy for her sister but couldn't help feeling a pang of loneliness. While Adana was surrounded by friends, Kyra often found herself alone. The other children rarely spoke to her, and when they did, it was usually to tease her. That day at the river, as Kyra sat by herself, skipping stones across the water, she heard a group of girls whispering nearby. They were looking at her and giggling. "Look at her," one of the girls said. "She's so tall and skinny, like a stick." Another girl laughed. "She's like a giraffe. I bet she can see over the trees." The girls burst into laughter, and Kyra felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She wanted to run away, but there was nowhere to go. The river was a place where everyone in the village came to relax and socialize, and there was no escaping the cruel words. Suddenly, Adana walked over to the group of girls, her face full of pride. "What are you all laughing at?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "We were just talking about your sister," one of the girls replied, still giggling. "She's so funny looking." Adana smirked. "Yes, she is, isn't she?" she said, joining in their laughter. "But don't worry, she's used to it. Right, Kyra?" Kyra looked up at her sister, hurt and confused. How could Adana, her own twin, laugh at her like this? But instead of confronting her, Kyra just nodded and forced a smile. "Yes, I'm used to it," she said quietly. The girls laughed again, and Adana smiled, feeling satisfied with herself. She didn't realize that her words had cut Kyra deeper than any of the other girls' insults ever could. That night, as Kyra lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the river. She had always known that she was different from Adana, but she had never thought that her own sister would turn against her. She wondered if things would ever change, if she would ever find a place where she belonged, but deep down, Kyra knew that she couldn't change who she was. She was tall, she was thin, and she was different. But she was also kind, wise, and strong. And though the village might not see it yet, she knew that one day, someone would recognize her true worth. As she drifted off to sleep, Kyra made a promise to herself. No matter what happened, she would stay true to who she was. She would not let the villagers' words or her sister's cruelty define her. She would continue to be kind, even in the face of unkindness, and she would hold on to the hope that one day, things would get better. And so, as the moon rose high in the sky and the village slept, Kyra's heart remained hopeful. She knew that her journey was just beginning, and that there were still many challenges ahead. But she also knew that she had the strength to face them, no matter what. As the years passed, the village of Nkota became more and more divided in its opinion of the twins. Adana continued to grow into a beautiful young woman, admired by everyone for her looks and charm. She was the first choice for any celebration, the center of attention at every gathering, and the favorite of all the villagers. Kyra, on the other hand, became more of an enigma with each passing day. Her height and thinness made her stand out in a way that the villagers found unsettling. To them, She was like a shadow that moved silently through the village, always present but never fully part of their world. People would often glance at her with a mix of pity and disdain, whispering behind her back about how strange she looked. One sunny afternoon, as the villagers gathered under the great baobab tree for a community meeting, the conversation turned to the future of the twins. The elders, sitting in a circle of honor, began to discuss the prospects of marriage for Adana and Kyra, as it was customary for young women of their age to be considered for suitors. "Adana will have no trouble finding a husband," said one of the elders, nodding approvingly. "She is as beautiful as the morning sun. Many young men have already shown interest in her." The other elders murmured in agreement. It was true, Adana had already received several proposals, and it was only a matter of time before she would be married off to a wealthy and influential family. But then, the conversation shifted to Kyra. A heavy silence fell over the group as they considered her fate. "And what of Kyra?" one elder finally asked, breaking the silence. "She is also of age, but I have not heard of any suitors seeking her hand." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. They all knew why Kyra had not received any proposals, but no one wanted to be the first to say it. After a long pause, the oldest and wisest of the elders, Shifakiki, cleared his throat and spoke. "Kyra is a good girl," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "She is kind-hearted and wise beyond her years. But her appearance is unusual. The young men of this village are not drawn to her as they are to Adana." The other elders nodded in agreement, though some looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "Perhaps," Shifakiki continued, "we should not focus so much on outward appearances. Kyra has many qualities that would make her a good wife. She is hardworking, intelligent, and has a gentle spirit. These are the things that matter in a marriage, not just beauty." "But will the young men see it that way?" another elder countered, shaking his head. "In this village, beauty is highly valued. I fear that Kyra will struggle to find a suitor." As the discussion continued, it became clear that the elders were conflicted. While they all respected Kyra's good nature, they knew that the reality of the village was harsh. Beauty was seen as a sign of good fortune and prosperity, and Kyra's appearance did not fit the ideal that the villagers held. Meanwhile, Kyra, who had been walking nearby, overheard the conversation. She had been on her way to the river to fetch water when she heard her name mentioned. Curious, she had stopped to listen, and what she heard broke her heart. "They don't see me," she thought to herself. "They only see what's on the outside." Kyra hurried away before the tears could spill over. She ran to her favorite spot by the river, where she often went to be alone with her thoughts. The riverbank was quiet, the only sound the gentle rush of water over the stones. Kyra sat down on the soft grass, hugging her knees to her chest as she stared out at the water. She thought about the elders' words and the villagers' judgment. No matter how hard she tried to fit in, to be kind and helpful, it was never enough. People only saw her tall, thin body, and judged her for it. Even her own sister, who once played with her and shared secrets, now barely spoke to her. "Why do they only see my looks?" Kyra wondered. "Don't they know there's more to me?" As she sat there, lost in thought, she noticed a small bird struggling in the water. Its wing was caught in some reeds, and it was unable to free itself. Without hesitation, Kyra waded into the river, her long legs making it easy to reach the bird. She gently untangled its wing and held it close to her chest as she walked back to the shore. Kyra sat on the riverbank, stroking the bird's feathers until it calmed down. She could feel its tiny heart beating rapidly against her palm, and she whispered soothing words to it. After a few minutes, the bird hopped out of her hands, testing its wing. It fluttered a few times before taking off into the sky, free once more. As she watched the bird disappear into the distance, Kyra felt a small spark of hope. The bird hadn't cared about how she looked. It only knew that she had helped it when it was in need. Maybe, just maybe, there were people out there who would see her for who she truly was, just like the bird had. Kyra knew that the road ahead would not be easy. She would have to face the villagers' judgment, and the pain of being overlooked and mocked. But she also knew that she had something inside her that no one could take away, a kind heart, a strong spirit, and the determination to be true to herself, no matter what. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the river, Kyra stood up and brushed the grass from her dress. She looked out at the water one last time before turning to head back to the village. She held her head high, determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead with grace and strength. Little did she know that her journey was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would change her life forever. Days turned into weeks, and the village of Nkota was abuzz with preparations for the upcoming harvest festival. This was the biggest celebration of the year, where the entire village came together to give thanks for the crops, share food, and dance into the night. It was also a time when young men and women often found themselves paired off, as the festival was known for sparking new romances. Adana was especially excited about the festival. She had already received several compliments from the village boys, who were eager to dance with her. She spent hours in front of the mirror, trying on different dresses and imagining herself as the belle of the ball. Kyra, on the other hand, dreaded the festival. She knew that while Adana would be the center of attention, she would be ignored or, worse, mocked. The thought of standing alone while everyone else danced and laughed filled her with dread. But even as Kyra worried about the festival, she continued her daily routine of helping her parents and avoiding the villagers as much as possible. She spent most of her time by the river, where she felt at peace. It was there, one day, that she encountered a stranger who would change everything. Kyra had just finished fetching water from the river and was about to head back to the village when she noticed a man sitting on a large rock by the water's edge. He was dressed in simple, worn clothes, and his skin was dark from the sun. He looked tired, as if he had been traveling for a long time. But what caught Kyra's attention most was his eyes. They were kind and gentle, with a hint of sadness. The man noticed Kyra and smiled. "Hello," he said in a soft voice. "I didn't mean to startle you. I was just resting here for a while." Kyra hesitated, unsure whether to approach him. She had been taught to be wary of strangers, but something about this man made her feel at ease. "Hello," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The man studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "You have a quiet strength about you," he said. "It's rare to see someone with such gentle eyes." Kyra was taken aback by the compliment. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She blushed and looked down at the ground, not knowing how to respond. The man noticed her discomfort and quickly changed the subject. "My name is Jadena," he said. "I'm a traveler, passing through many villages on my way to find a new home. I've seen much in my travels, but this place, this river, has a special beauty to it." Kyra nodded, still feeling a bit shy. "It's my favorite place," she admitted. "I come here whenever I want to be alone." Jadena smiled again. "It's a good place for that. The water is calm, and the trees offer shade. It's as if time slows down here, giving you space to think." They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the sound of the river. Kyra found herself relaxing in Jadena's presence, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "May I ask you something?" Jadena said after a while, breaking the silence. "Why do you come here alone? Don't you have friends in the village?" Kyra hesitated, unsure how much to share with this stranger. But something about Jadena's gentle demeanor made her feel that she could trust him. "I don't fit in," she finally said, her voice tinged with sadness. "Everyone in the village thinks I'm strange because of how I look. They don't see anything beyond that." Jadena nodded thoughtfully. "People can be cruel sometimes," he said. "They often judge others based on appearances without taking the time to understand who they really are. But you shouldn't let their opinions define you. You are more than what they see." Kyra felt a lump in her throat at Jadena's words. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this before, with such understanding and kindness. It was as if he could see the pain she carried inside and wanted to ease it. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "That means a lot to me." Jadena smiled warmly. "You have a strong spirit, Kyra. Don't let anyone take that away from you. One day, people will see you for who you truly are, and they will regret not having recognized it sooner." Kyra felt a glimmer of hope in her heart. She had spent so long feeling invisible, but Jadena's words made her believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the river, Jadena stood up and stretched. "I should be on my way," he said. "But before I go, I want to give you something." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden pendant in the shape of a bird. "This is for you," he said, placing the pendant in Kyra's hand. "It's a symbol of freedom and strength. Whenever you feel alone or uncertain, remember the bird and what it stands for." Kyra looked down at the pendant, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Jidenna," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I will treasure this." Jidenna smiled and nodded. "Take care, Kyra. And remember, you are stronger than you know." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Kyra watched him go, feeling a sense of loss but also a newfound sense of strength. Jidenna's words had touched her deeply, and she knew she would never forget him. As she made her way back to the village, the pendant clutched in her hand, Kyra felt a shift within her. She realized that she didn't need the approval of the villagers to feel worthy. She had her own strength, her own kindness, and that was enough. For the first time in a long while, Kyra felt hopeful about the future. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but with the memory of Jidenna's kindness and the pendant as a reminder of her inner strength, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And so, as the sun set on the village of Nkota, Kyra walked back with a renewed sense of purpose, her heart light and her spirit strong. The day of the harvest festival finally arrived, and the village of Nkota was alive with excitement. Colorful decorations hung from every house, and the air was filled with the delicious aroma of roasted yams, spicy stews, and fresh fruits. The villagers bustled about, preparing for the evening's festivities, which would include feasting, dancing, and storytelling around the great bonfire. Adana was in her element. She had chosen her finest dress, a deep red gown that shimmered in the sunlight, and adorned herself with beautiful beads and bangles that jingled as she moved. As she stood in front of the mirror, admiring her reflection, she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Tonight, she knew, all eyes would be on her. "Kyra, are you ready yet?" Adana called out, barely concealing her impatience. Kyra, in the next room, was struggling with her own preparations. She had chosen a simple dress, pale blue with delicate embroidery, but it paled in comparison to Adana's vibrant attire. She tried to tie a colorful sash around her waist, but no matter how she adjusted it, she felt it did nothing to improve her appearance. With a sigh, she decided to leave it as it was. Kyra walked over to the small table by her bed, where she had placed the pendant Jidenna had given her. She picked it up and held it in her hand, feeling the smooth wood against her palm. The memory of Jidenna's kind words filled her with a small measure of confidence. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "You are stronger than you know." She tied the pendant around her neck, tucking it under her dress where it could rest close to her heart. With one last glance in the mirror, she took a deep breath and stepped out of her room. Adana was waiting for her in the main room, tapping her foot impatiently. When she saw Kyra, she frowned. "Is that what you're wearing?" she asked, her tone dripping with disapproval. Kyra hesitated, feeling the familiar sting of her sister's criticism. "Yes," she replied quietly. "I think it looks nice." Adana sighed dramatically. "I suppose it will have to do. Just try not to embarrass me tonight, okay? This is an important night for me." Kyra nodded, trying not to let her sister's words hurt her. She knew that Adana cared deeply about appearances and what others thought of her, but she wished her sister could see past the surface and appreciate her for who she was. The two sisters left their house and made their way to the village square, where the festival was already in full swing. The square was a dazzling display of colors, with lanterns hanging from every tree and the bonfire crackling in the center. The villagers were dressed in their finest clothes, laughing and talking as they mingled around the food tables and danced to the rhythm of drums. As they entered the square, Adana was immediately surrounded by a group of young men, all eager to dance with her and shower her with compliments. She smiled and laughed, enjoying the attention as she gracefully accepted their invitations. Kyra, on the other hand, stood at the edge of the square, feeling out of place. She watched as the villagers danced and celebrated, but she couldn't bring herself to join in. Everywhere she looked, she saw groups of friends laughing together, families sharing food, and couples dancing under the stars. But no one seemed to notice her. Feeling the familiar pang of loneliness, Kyra decided to slip away from the square and head toward the river. She knew she wouldn't be missed, and the quiet of the riverbank would be a welcome escape from the noise and bustle of the festival. As she walked away from the festivities, she heard a voice behind her. "Kyra, wait." She turned around to see a young man hurrying after her. He was tall and lean, with a friendly smile that immediately put her at ease. Kyra recognized him as Shinadu, one of the few villagers who had always been kind to her. He was a humble farmer, known for his gentle nature and hard-working spirit. "Shinadu," Kyra said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I saw you leaving the square," Shinadu replied, slightly out of breath from his brisk walk. "I was hoping to find you. I wanted to ask if you would dance with me." Kyra blinked in surprise. "You want to dance with me?" she asked, almost disbelieving. Shinadu smiled warmly. "Yes, Kyra. I've always wanted to dance with you, but I never had the courage to ask before. You have a special light about you, one that not everyone can see. But I see it." Kyra felt her heart swell with emotion. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, and she wasn't sure how to respond. She had grown so used to being overlooked and ridiculed that the idea of someone genuinely wanting to spend time with her felt like a dream. "Shinadu, I don't know what to say," Kyra stammered, feeling her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "You don't have to say anything," Shinadu said gently. "Just dance with me. Let's enjoy the festival together." Kyra hesitated for a moment, but then she remembered Jadena's words and the pendant that lay close to her heart. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, I'll dance with you." Shinadu's smile widened, and he offered her his hand. Kyra took it, feeling a surge of warmth as their fingers intertwined. They walked back to the square together, where the music was lively and the villagers were still dancing under the stars. As they joined the crowd, Kyra felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. She was aware of the curious glances from some of the villagers, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't care. She focused on Shinadu, on the warmth of his hand in hers, and the joy in his eyes as they began to dance. They moved to the rhythm of the drums, their steps in sync as they twirled around the square. Kyra's initial nerves melted away as she let herself get lost in the music. She felt a sense of freedom she had never known before, as if the weight of all the judgments and criticisms that had plagued her for so long had been lifted. For the first time, Kyra allowed herself to truly enjoy the moment. She laughed and spun with Shinadu, her worries forgotten as they danced under the night sky. The villagers continued to celebrate around them, but to Kyra, it felt like she and Shinadu were the only two people in the world. As the night wore on, Kyra realized that she was smiling, a genuine, heartfelt smile that came from deep within. It wasn't just the dance that made her feel this way, it was the knowledge that someone saw her for who she really was and appreciated her for it. When the dance finally ended, Shinadu led Kyra to the edge of the square, where they could catch their breath and talk away from the noise. He looked at her with admiration in his eyes. "You dance beautifully, Kyra," he said. "I knew you had it in you." Kyra smiled shyly. "Thank you, Shinadu. You've made this night very special for me." Shinadu took her hand again, squeezing it gently. "I'm glad I could. I hope this is just the beginning of many more special moments for you, Kyra." As they stood together, watching the flickering flames of the bonfire, Kyra felt a deep sense of contentment. The harvest festival, which she had once dreaded, had turned into a night she would never forget. And as she looked into Shinadu's kind eyes, she couldn't help but feel that perhaps, just perhaps, she was finally beginning to find her place in the world.